When most people set up a feeder, they're picturing something specific: cardinals at the seed, chickadees darting in and out, maybe a goldfinch or two if they're lucky. But right now, there's a good chance your feeder is also being visited by birds that are quietly working against everything you set it up for. Birds that eat the food meant for your favorites, that scare off the species you actually want, and in a few cases, that make your yard a riskier place for the birds you care most about. Here's the part that surprises people: a feeder with more activity isn't automatically a better feeder. The birds that end up dominating it are often the same birds that determine which species never show up in the first place. Today, we're looking at 5 of the most common visitors to backyard feeders across North America. Birds that, in different ways, dominate, displace, or quietly work against the species most people are hoping to attract. This isn't about disliking any of these birds. Every one of them is a genuinely interesting species with its own place in the bigger picture. This is about understanding what's actually happening at your feeder and the small adjustments that can shift things back in favor of the birds you set it up for. Stick around for bird number 5 especially. It's the one that catches people off guard because it's a bird almost everyone already loves. 1. The European starling. The European starling isn't originally from North America at all. The story behind how it got here is almost stranger than fiction. Back in 1890, a small group of enthusiasts released around 100 starlings into New York's Central Park, reportedly as part of an effort to introduce every bird species mentioned in Shakespeare's plays to America. From that handful of birds, the population has grown to an estimated 200 million across the continent today. At a feeder, starlings tend to arrive in large, fast-moving flocks, and they can clear out a sweat feeder in a matter of minutes. They're loud, pushy, and they outcompete almost every native species you're likely trying to attract. Cardinals won't contest a flock of starlings, neither will chickadees, even blue jays tend to back off. There's also a health angle. Starlings can carry and spread certain bacteria through their droppings, including salmonella, directly onto the surfaces where your other birds are feeding. The most effective approach isn't conflict, it's feeder design. Starlings aren't built to cling upside down. A sweat feeder that requires the bird to hang underneath it to feed will exclude starlings almost entirely, while staying perfectly accessible to woodpeckers, nuthatches, and chickadees who feed that way naturally anyway. For seed feeders, a surrounding cage with gap size for smaller birds works well. Starlings are simply too large to fit through, while cardinals, finches, and chickadees pass through without issue. 2. The house sparrow. Like the starling, the house sparrow is an introduced species, first released in Brooklyn in 1851. Within 50 years, it had spread across the entire continent, and globally, it's now considered one of the most numerous bird species on the planet, with estimates around 540 million individuals worldwide. At the feeder, house sparrows show up in numbers and tend to dominate through sheer persistence. They have a strong preference for the seeds that fill most cheap mixed seed bags: millet, milo, and similar fillers. The more of that mix you put out, the more sparrows you're likely to attract, and the more they crowd out everything else. But the bigger issue for many backyard birders isn't the feeder at all, it's nest boxes. House sparrows are cavity nesters, and they're known to aggressively target bluebird boxes and tree swallow boxes, evicting the original occupants, destroying eggs, and taking over the cavity for themselves. If you have nest boxes, check them regularly. House sparrow nests should be removed as soon as they're identified. It's one of the simplest, highest impact things a backyard birder can do for native cavity nesting species. For the feeder itself, the fix is often as easy as a seed swap. Switching from cheap mixed seed to black oil sunflower and safflower changes things quickly. House sparrows strongly prefer millet and milo and tend to avoid safflower, which cardinals, by contrast, actively seek out. Many people notice a real shift in who's visiting within just a few days of making that change. 3. The brown-headed cowbird. The brown-headed cowbird has a strategy that sounds almost unbelievable. It doesn't build nests at all. It never has. Instead, it lays its eggs in the nests of other species, over 220 different host species across North America, and lets those birds raise its young for it. This strategy is known as brood parasitism, and cowbirds have been refining it for a very long time. At the feeder itself, a cowbird isn't usually a major disruptor. It eats seed and takes up space, but it doesn't dominate the way starlings do. The real issue is more indirect. Feeders concentrate birds in one place, and cowbirds take advantage of that concentration. By running a feeder, especially a busy, varied one, you're effectively giving a cowbird an easy way to see which species are nesting nearby, which it can then target. Research has found that cowbird activity tends to be higher in areas with a lot of feeder density. Your feeder isn't the cause of this on its own, but it can be part of what makes it easier. The most useful habit here is simple tidiness. Clean up spilled seed from the ground regularly, Cowbirds are primarily ground foragers, and ground spillage is exactly what draws them in. A feeder area kept clear of accumulated seed on the ground significantly reduces how much cowbirds use your yard as a foraging spot. 4. The common grackle. Grackles are large, glossy, genuinely striking birds, and also some of the more frustrating visitors a backyard feeder can attract. A grackle at your feeder isn't just feeding, it tends to take over. They use a feeding technique called gaping, where they force their beak into a seed to crack it open, often damaging or scattering far more than they actually eat. Large amounts of seed end up on the ground rather than eaten. They also tend to arrive in groups, and those groups can physically block smaller birds from landing at all. In late summer and fall, grackles often join enormous mixed flocks with red-winged blackbirds and cowbirds, sometimes numbering in the thousands, that can strip a feeder bare in a single visit. Once a yard becomes known to one of these flocks, they're genuinely difficult to discourage. Seed choice makes a real difference here too. Grackles tend to avoid safflower seed. They don't seem to like the taste or the harder shell, so switching to safflower can dramatically cut down grackle visits while cardinals continue to feed normally. Weight-activated feeder perches are another option, designed to close off access when something heavy lands. Grackles are easily heavy enough to trigger the mechanism, while chickadees and finches pass through without any issue. 5. The American crow. This is the one that tends to surprise people most because crows are genuinely fascinating animals. They're social, deeply intelligent, and the subject of some of the most remarkable cognitive research done on any bird. And they're also a real consideration for your backyard feeder, just not in the way you'd expect. Crows don't typically feed from hanging feeders directly. Instead, they tend to watch feeders from a distance and use them as a kind of resource map. They observe where smaller birds are caching food, and more significantly, they can follow parent birds away from the feeder back toward their nests, which they may then raid for eggs or chicks. Studies have found that nest success for small songbirds tends to be measurably lower in areas with an active crow presence during nesting season. The feeder itself isn't really the target, it's more like a reliable daily gathering point that makes it easier for a crow to keep track of where the smaller birds are coming and going. None of this is a reason to dislike crows. They're remarkable animals doing what crows have always done. But understanding what a feeder represents to them changes how you might think about managing your yard, especially during breeding season. Timing and cover are the two most useful tools. During peak nesting season, roughly April through July, reducing or pausing ground feeding can help, since that's what draws crow attention most. Dense native planting that provides cover from above also makes a real difference, giving nesting birds places that aren't easily visible to a crow surveying from a perch or in flight. Keeping your feeder on a consistent schedule helps too. Smaller birds that know exactly when food will be available tend to feed quickly and efficiently, spending less time exposed in the open. 5 birds, all of them common, all of them doing something at your feeder that most people never really think about. None of this is about building a perfect feeder because that doesn't really exist. It's about understanding what's actually happening in your yard day to day and making a few small, deliberate choices that gently tip things back in favor of the birds you set the feeder up for in the first place. Your cardinals, chickadees, and goldfinches are quietly competing for that feeder every single day. Now, you know exactly what they're up against. Which of these 5 shows up most at your feeder? And is there anything here that's going to change how you set things up? Let me know in the comments. I read all of them. If this was useful, subscribe. Next time, we'll look at the birds that actually help protect the ones you love, and how to make your yard more attractive to them specifically.